Alright, what is up, boys and girls? Today we're going to be doing another little discussion. Half discussion, half rant, as this will probably end up being. There hasn't been a whole lot of news lately about new cards, so I haven't been able to come up with any combo videos for you guys. I've tried multiple different things like Amazonas and Ninjas from Darkwing Blast, but I just really couldn't come up with anything. So instead we're gonna talk about something that is near and dear to me, which is the fire attribute and fire decks in general, specifically in the current state of the game. Fire is in a rough spot. The last good fire archetype that we've had was Salad in 2019, and even then it was really hard to justify if that deck being fire actually made a difference. If Salamangreat was any deck other than fire, it probably would have been 10 times better, because the deck has no generic fire support. Because the generic fire support is mostly trash or very situational. So you can see I have some cards on the screen right here. And this, you can see here I searched fire, and I combed through, I guess I should add this, right? I combed through like all of the fire cards, trying to find any piece of generic support at all that was even remotely playable. And this is pretty much all I could come up with. And even then, most of these cards you'll never see in any actual fire deck, except for like very specific decks that are built around these cards. For example, none of these cards saw play in Salad, except maybe sometimes Circle, but even then that was kind of more of a meme than actually being good. So there's a couple of these cards that I want to highlight in particular, and a lot of these will transition over to another piece that is going to be talking about the identity of different attributes and what I want Konami to be pushing towards for the fire attribute as a whole. The first card I want to talk about is Agnimazud. So this card, if you've seen my Fire King videos, you know that I love this card. It does hard neg. If you're playing a non-graveyard centric fire deck, this card does hard neg you. But at the end of the day, this card is a 2900 attack monster that has a non-target banished at the cost of destroying 2 fires, or technically 1 fire and 1 fire or non-fire. The main thing I want to highlight about this card is that it does have the ability to destroy cards in your hand or field by card effect in order to summon it, and then get the non-target banish effect, which outs pretty much anything that isn't unaffected, right? And then next, we're going to talk about Brush Fire. This card has a lot of future potential, but there's pretty much nothing that it supports right now. But the main thing is that when this card is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, which could be by, like, you know, card effect, by battle, you can send 1 fire from your deck to the graveyard. So it's worse than Armageddon Knight, obviously, because you have to destroy it by external means in order to get the graveyard dump. Whereas Armageddon Knight, you can just kind of summon it out and get the free dump. But it also has technically an on-field effect that when a fire monster is destroyed, you can send a fire from deck to grave. When this card is destroyed, you have to send a fire. So this, I don't think this will miss timing. But you can see that some kind of fire, like, destruction identity is being formed here, right? I think Agnimazud is a great card. I think this card will be great if Konami ever decides to actually give us good fire stuff. Circle, yet again, another card that's just generic fire support, where you destroy a fire on the field to summon a different fire from the grave, and it's a quick play, so it's very nice. And then, of course, the saving grace of fire attribute is, of course, Rekindling. Soul Charge has been banned for years now. This card is a Soul Charge for fire monsters with 200 defense exactly, but it does not negate their effects. They can still attack, you still get a battle phase. It banishes them during the end phase, but you're still going to be able to do whatever you want with them, like link them off, synchro, exceeds. You can do pretty much anything with no restriction with this card. And on paper, it seems really broken. The problem is that there's 0 ways to actually search this card. Decks like Flamevel. There are so many fire decks that have monsters with 200 defense. For example, Fire King. You guys know I love Fire King. Arvada, 200 defense. Barong, 200 defense. Yaksha, 200 defense. Even Kirin has 200 defense if you want like a level 3. And then of course there's Laughable. Tons of Laughable monsters have exactly 200 defense, because this was kind of there was a point in time where Konami was heavy focusing on fire decks being 200 defense for Rekindling. You know, around the time that Laughable and Flamevel and Fire Kings were all coming out, around like the late Synchro, early Xyz. And of course, all of the Flamevel monsters also have 200 defense. Fire Dog, Magician. Magician being a level 4 tuner is a big deal. The fire attribute did at one point focus heavily around Rekindling being a thing, and even in Edison format, which is around like mid to late Synchro era. Flamevel is actually a pretty solid deck, specifically because of how powerful this card is. And nowadays we have even more options to just dump fire monsters to the grave, whether it's like milling, destroying them in hand or field. So we have plenty of ways to actually get fire monsters into the graveyard, but the payoff is so inconsistent. There's no way to get this card. I really wish they would make like some kind of Fire Link 2 that searches this card, but I don't think it would be broken, but you know, I could be just completely proven wrong on that. So you can see that there is some kind of like identity for fire attribute forming around destroying things by card effect. Agnimazud triggers off of it, Brushfire triggers off of it, Circle of the Fire Kings, Nine-Tailed Fox. And the payoff for destroying all of these monsters should be Rekindling, but of course it's so inconsistent, there's no way to actually make that work. And I'm sure if you looked up any other attribute's generic support, it would far outclass what you see here for the fire attribute. I do want to highlight a couple of like periods of time here for fire decks. The first one I want to talk about is the whole Fire Beast Warrior thing. Yeah, I'm pretty sure like all 3 of these decks, the Fire Fist, the Coach Soldier, and the Fire Kings, I think these all came out kind of around the Xyz era, either in the middle or a little bit after. And it did seem like for a while that they were going really heavy into this Fire Beast Warrior thing. specifically with the coach soldiers, because they specifically target a level 4 fire beast warrior. And I think they were like really trying to push this whole fire beast warrior thing. And Fire Fist, it was good for its time. Like, it did have some competitive relevance. Thanks to, of course, like Coach Soldier Wolfbark. Fire Kings didn't really have any kind of competitive relevance until like Cosmo came out, which was in the Pendulum era. But then pretty much just they dropped this. The whole Fire Beast Warrior thing, once the Xyz era was over, they were just kind of like, fuck it, like who cares? Nobody cares about this anymore. And then things were pretty silent for the fire attribute for a while. Infernoid made a little bit of a splash into competitive, but Infernoid had pretty much zero reason to be fire attribute. In my opinion, the deck would have been 10 times better if it was any attribute other than fire. Those monsters being fire actually kind of held the deck back. If the Infernoids were like dark attribute, oh my god, that deck would have been crazy. And then Salamangreat happened, but like I said, Salad didn't take advantage of any generic fire support at all. So I hardly consider Salamangreat to be like a fire deck, because it didn't use any fire cards, if you get what I'm saying. And then after Salad, we had Infernoble. And again, Konami like switched directions entirely for fire decks. And for a little minute there, with Toon Chaos and Rise of the Duelist, you could see that they were going heavy into this like fire warrior style, right? With decks like Infernoble being like, this card in particular is an Armageddon Knight for fire warriors, which is very nice. Sublimation Knight is a 1-card Isolde that's also a fire warrior. Gearfried is a fire warrior that's searchable off of the Infernoble cards, that focuses on equip cards. And then of course Fire Flint Lady being the most generic extender that is searchable off of many of the fire warrior cards. And of course, let's talk about the, I don't know how to spell Durandal. Let's just do this. Durandal is kind of a Rhoda for level 5 or lower fire warriors, but you can play 3 of it. So it made the deck very consistent, but the deck came out at a very unfortunate time where there were no competitive events, and Konami basically slaughtered the deck before the deck even had a chance to top an official event. Which really sucks, because I bought this deck, and everything in it got banned before we even had a YCS or a regional, where the deck was legal. So Konami just shitting on all of my hopes and dreams. And it is also worth mentioning that many of the Infernobles were given 200 defense. Particularly the level 1s. Astolfo, Renaud, and even like this new card that hasn't come out yet, they gave that 200 defense as well. Even Charles has 200 defense, so you could actually rekindling Charles, I think, right? Yeah, you could rekindling for Charles. So again, I feel like it's not... Oh, Sublimation Knight has 200 defense as well. So I feel like it's not completely out of the realm that Konami is still paying attention to the fact that rekindling exists. Fire Fist had a couple of 200 defense monsters. Fire Kings had multiple 200 defense monsters. that were all level 4 for like a rank 4 spam, and even Infernoble would be able to take advantage of rekindling with multiple monsters. So I feel like if Konami really wants fire decks to be useful, we really need like a Laughable Link 2 that searches rekindling, or some kind of Link monster or something that searches this card. Because pretty much every fire deck that has been made in the last 10 years or more benefits from this card. And I feel like that's not an accident. I feel like Konami definitely wanted rekindling to be a thing for multiple fire decks. And it's just unfortunate that it's in the state now where, like, look at this. Even this random card that I just hovered over has 200 defense. It's definitely not a coincidence that this whole 200 defense thing exists for fire monsters. I just wish they would like really embrace that. Next, I want to talk about this example here of what Konami thinks is a fire boss monster in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! So I just want to read this card to you real quick. It is a level 8 synchro with 2900 attack. Requires a tuner and a non-tuner fire monster. So already, they expect you to play this in a deck that is suited or built around fire monsters, because this thing is not generic. So you have to play this in a fire deck. And note that it is a Laughable card. They did come out with like a little bit of Laughable support in like 2019 and 2020 for some reason. But its effect is that when your opponent activates an effect of a monster on the field or in the hand, quick effect, you can destroy that monster, and if you do, inflict 1000 damage to your opponent. So already, your opponent activates a monster effect, you can destroy it and burn them. But they still get the effect, which really sucks. Not to mention that plenty of monsters these days actually benefit from being destroyed by card effects. So this card might actually not even be good. Right? For a deck like, if you're playing against Tearlament and they use like Havness in hand and you're like, oh, okay, well I want to pop the Havness so that it can't summon and then mill cards. Well then if you pop it, they're just going to get the effect Diffusion and you're fucked anyway. Just as an example. So if this Synchro Summon card is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can special summon 3 non-synchro fire monsters with 200 defense from your grave, but negate their effects. So if this card is destroyed by an opponent's card, which is important, it's like a mini rekindling. So summons up to 3, right? There are a lot of issues with this effect. For one thing, please name any deck in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! That does not have a way around that effect. Most decks around so this card came out in 2021. This card came out in the middle of 2021, in like the middle of the Albaz era of Yu-Gi-Oh! Even decks, when this card came out, had plenty of ways to play around this effect, right? Decks can send, they can banish, they can bounce, they can shuffle. There are four or more different ways that you can dodge this effect. Even Nightmare Unicorn, a completely generic Link 3. Just shuffle this thing back and you don't get the revive effect. It's absolutely stupid. Now, go read Sky Striker Ace Ray. If a Link monster leaves the field for any reason, banish, send, destroy, bounce, shuffle, whatever, you get to summon back Ray. Right? You can clearly tell, and Ray came out in what, 2018? You can clearly tell that they didn't think this through very much. You know, summoning 3 monsters from your grave is very powerful, but the fact that it's locked behind such an easy easy trigger to dodge is just a slap in the face. And the destruction effect, like I mentioned earlier, also can just completely backfire on you. And this card came out in 2021, right? This card, it is non-generic. The effects have the ability to backfire on you immensely. And this is what Konami thinks is a suitable boss monster in the year 2021 for fire decks. For like Laval and Flamevel, and maybe Infernoble to an extent. An absolute slap in the face. Because, have you read Draco Berserker? This card came out in 2019. This card came out 2 years earlier than Laughable X-Lord. And let's just read its effects. For one thing, completely generic materials. You can make this in any deck. It doesn't even have to be fire. 3000 attack. They gave it 100 more attack than the fucking Laughable X-Lord, which has non-generic materials. And it has the same effect that when your opponent activates a monster effect, which is from anywhere, by the way, right? You can banish it. So Laughable X-Lord has to be the effect of a monster on the field or the hand. Draco Berserker is from anywhere. It can be the graveyard. You can banish a monster from the graveyard, like the effect of a monster in the graveyard, like a Kaleido Heart that tries to bring itself back. You can just banish it so that it can't summon itself. Laughable X-Lord, you're just fucked. You can't do anything to it. In its second effect, if it destroys an effect monster by battle, it gains attack equal to that monster's attack and can make a second attack on a monster. So this thing is an OTK machine. It has a good effect going first and a good effect going second. The fact that Laughable X-Lord was made 2 years after Draco Berserker and is worse in every single possible way is just an absolute dick slap to the face for people that enjoy fire decks. Like, these cards are not even comparable in how powerful they are. More attack, generic materials, banishes from anywhere, right? Does not trigger effects that require being destroyed by a card effect. It is absolutely laughable. And this card came out in Ghosts from the Past 2, which was earlier this year. So this is what Konami thinks is a 2021 boss monster for fire synchro decks. Because it requires a non-tuner fire monster, so again, not generic. If this card is synchro summoned, you can draw 2, then if you have a fire in your hand, send 2 cards from your hand to the graveyard, including a fire monster. So that effect isn't horrible. But then you go read Dugaris. Completely generic. Completely generic rank 4 Xyz, which is super easy to make for any deck. You can draw 2 and then discard 1. Absolutely no restriction other than that you skip your next draw phase, which in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, skipping your next draw phase means almost nothing. Right? So this is a draw 2, discard 2, and you have to have a fire in your hand. Otherwise, you shuffle your entire hand into the deck after revealing it. It's just, again, like a completely generic card that was printed years before this card that outclasses it. And then once per turn, you can banish a fire. You can banish one fire from your grave, change face-up monsters your opponent controls up to the number of Laughable monsters to face-down defense, which at the least is going to be 1. It's not a quick effect, so you can only use it like going second. It requires you to banish a fire from your grave, which is understandable if you have to use a fire monster to make it anyway. And it's only gonna flip like 1 monster, right? Unless you're playing a dedicated Laughable deck, you're only flipping 1 monster. You know what card came out 5 years earlier than this card? You know what card came out 5 years earlier than this card? Ultimate Conductor. Now this is not a generic card. I will give it that. It's not generic. You have to play it in a dedicated dinosaur deck. But this card is not generic either. You have to play specifically fire monsters and a fire deck that can synchro summon a level 7, which is not easy. Infernoble can't do that easily. Flameveil can't do that easily. Shit, these cards are both Laughable, right? Have you read Laughable cards? They suck. Molten Conduction Field is the only good card. All of these other cards are complete ass cheeks. Like even Laughable Chain, they made this card generic and it's banned. So Ultimate Conductor is a quick effect. You destroy any monster in your hand or field. Any monster. Change all face-up monsters your opponent controls to face-down defense. So this is a quick effect that flips every monster face-down. This is a slow effect that is only going to flip like 1 or 2 monsters face-down at all. Not to mention that this card has an effect that actually matters for face-down defense position monsters. You use this guy to flip a monster face down, and like, what do you gain from that? What can you possibly gain from that? This thing's only 26, right? You flip it face down and then you swing over it, and then congratulations, you just outed a monster that could be outed by literally any other level 7 synchro. It's just an absolute travesty that Konami considers this to be what fire monsters are good at in the year 2021 and 2022. It's an absolute slap in the face. Also, where the fuck is the Fire Duelist pack, Konami? Jesus Christ.